This isn't a story I tell at parties. In fact, for a long time, I couldn't tell it at all. But it's true, every last word of it, and it's the reason that even now, at my age, I still believe a man's true worth is measured not by what he builds, but by what he's willing to tear down. The humiliation began with the weight of a book in my hands. It was a heavy, ostentatious thing, bound in navy leather with the company name embossed in gold leaf, Callahan Stone, 50 years of architectural excellence. We were gathered in the grand ballroom of the Four Seasons Hotel Boston, a glittering sea of champagne flutes and tailored suits, all there to celebrate the firm's golden anniversary. I stood near the back, a ghost at my own feast, watching Liam Callahan, the son of my late partner, work the room. He was a predator in a tuxedo, all teeth and charisma, accepting congratulations for a legacy he had inherited, not earned. Then he stepped up to the podium, a spotlight finding his perfectly coiffed hair, and he held up a copy of the book. To mark this historic occasion, he announced, his voice booming with false sincerity, "We've commissioned a history of the firm. A testament to the vision of my father, William Callahan, and the dynasty of innovation he created." In that single, breathtaking moment, as he spoke the word dynasty and held up that gilded lie, he didn't just erase me from the company's history, he tried to erase me from my own life. If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel, tell us where you're from, and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows. My name is Arthur Stone. For 50 years, I was the Stone in Callahan Stone. I was the quiet one, the one who lived not in the spotlights but in the silent, sacred space of blueprints and structural calculus. William Callahan Sr. was my best friend, or so I believed. We met at MIT, two young men with more ambition than sense. He was the salesman, the face, the guy who could sell a suspension bridge to a man who only needed a footpath. I was the engine. I was the one who could actually build the bridge, make it stand against the hurricane, and make it beautiful. We shook hands in a Cambridge diner in 1973, sketching our logo on a napkin. He would handle the clients, I would handle the creation. It was a perfect symbiosis. He was the thunder, and I was the lightning that did the real work. For decades, it worked. We built a reputation for designs that were not only aesthetically daring but structurally revolutionary. We pioneered a cantilevered suspension system for residential high-rises that became the industry standard. We developed a proprietary carbon fiber concrete blend that was lighter, stronger, and more sustainable than anything on the market. These weren't William's ideas. They were mine. They were born from sleepless nights hunched over a drafting table, from countless failed stress tests in my workshop, from a mind that saw the world in angles, load-bearing capacities, and elegant solutions. William was brilliant at selling these innovations. He'd walk into a boardroom, charm the pants off a dozen executives, and walk out with a contract. He'd come back to the office, clap me on the shoulder, and say, "You did it again, Artie." They loved it. And I, a man who found more comfort in the company of schematics than people, was content with that. I had my workshop, my drafting table, and the quiet satisfaction of solving the puzzle. The credit, the accolades, the magazine covers featuring William's smiling face in front of my buildings, I told myself none of that mattered. The work was what mattered. My late wife, Eleanor, never trusted him. "He signs the checks, Arthur," she'd say, "but you lay the foundation stones. Don't ever forget where the real value is." She saw the subtle ways William minimized my role in public, referring to me as his technical genius or his head of design, as if I were a gifted employee rather than a founding partner. I'd brush off her concerns. "That's just Bill," I'd say. "He's the showman. It's what he does." The truth is, I was afraid of confrontation. I was a creator, not a fighter. And I loved the work too much to risk the partnership that enabled it. William Sr. died of a sudden heart attack 12 years ago. His son, Liam, who had spent his life coasting on the family name and a business degree from Boston College, took over. Liam had his father's arrogance but none of his charm or intelligence. He saw the firm not as a place of creation, but as a cash machine. He saw me as a relic, a piece of old furniture that came with the office. He'd walk past my desk, the same one I'd occupied for 40 years, and nod with a dismissive little smile. "Still at it, Arthur? Don't work too hard." He started calling my designs the old Callahan method, subtly rebranding my life's work as his father's intellectual property. I was 50 then, and I let it happen. I was grieving my friend, and frankly, I was tired. I figured I would work for another decade, mentor the next generation of architects, the ones who still had the fire, and then retire quietly. The anniversary gala was meant to be my unofficial send-off. I had turned 62. I had given my notice. My last day was a month away. I thought the party, and the book, would be a final, respectful acknowledgement of my half-century of service. A golden parachute of recognition. I was a fool. Standing there in that ballroom, I felt a cold dread creep up my spine as Liam continued his speech. He talked about the Callahan vision, the Callahan legacy. He never said my name. Not once. After the applause died down, a young associate was tasked with handing out the books. She approached me with a bright, pitying smile. "Mr. Stone, Liam wanted you to have one of the first copies." I took it. The book felt like a tombstone. I opened it to the table of contents. Chapter 1, The Founder's Dream. Chapter 2, The Callahan Method, Revolutionizing the Modern Skyscraper. Chapter 3, A Son's Inheritance, The Next Generation of Innovation. My name wasn't there. I flipped through the glossy pages, my hands starting to tremble. There were photos of our most famous projects, the Triton Tower in the Seaport District, the Crystalline Athenaeum Theater, the Westwood Bridge. Projects I had bled for. And under every photo, the caption was the same, designed by William Callahan Sr. My own photo was in the back, on a page titled Our Valued Team, tucked between the head of accounting and the director of human resources. The caption read, Arthur Stone, Head of Engineering, 1973, present. I wasn't a partner. I was an employee. A long-serving one, but an employee nonetheless. I looked up from the book, my vision blurring. Liam was walking toward me, a smug, triumphant smirk playing on his lips. He clapped a hand on my shoulder, his grip feeling like a brand. "Well, Arthur," he said, his voice a low, condescending permit only for me. 50 years. Quite a run for an employee. You should be proud. He leaned in closer, his breath smelling of expensive scotch. Don't worry. We've put together a very generous severance package for you. A token of our appreciation for your loyalty. He tapped the cover of the book with his finger. A beautiful book, isn't it? It's important to get the story right. History, after all, is written by the winners. He squeezed my shoulder one last time and walked away, leaving me standing there, clutching the monument to my own erasure. The weight of the book in my hands was no longer just leather and paper. It was the weight of 50 years of lies. And in that moment, the quiet creator inside of me died, and something else, something cold, patient, and methodical, began to wake up. I walked out of the ballroom without saying a word to anyone. The crisp Boston night air did nothing to cool the rage burning in my chest. I went home to my empty brownstone in the South End, the house Eleanor and I had bought with the money from my first big design success, a success now officially credited to William Callahan. I sat in my study, the book lying open on the desk in front of me, its lies illuminated by a single lamp. For the first time, I looked back on my life not with pride, but with the sickening clarity of a man who realizes he's been the willing victim of a 50-year con. The handshake in the diner, the promises of partnership, the shared dream, it was all a beautifully constructed facade. And I, the master architect, had never once thought to check the foundations. I stayed up all night, the silence of the house amplifying the storm in my mind. The sun rose, casting long shadows across the floor, and I knew what I had to do. They had erased my history. I would dedicate the rest of my life to erasing their future. The first step was to find the truth of that original napkin sketch and the handshake that followed. I needed to find the partnership agreement I'd signed half a century ago, the document that I was now certain was not a declaration of partnership, but my own professional death warrant. I just had no idea that the truth would be far more insidious than I could have ever imagined. I found the document in a dusty, long-forgotten file box in my attic, tucked away with old tax returns and Eleanor's college report cards. It was dated October 12, 1973. The paper was brittle, the typed ink faded, but the signatures were clear: William Callahan Sr. and Arthur Stone. I remembered the day we signed it. We were in a cramped little office we were renting on State Street. William had brought in his family's lawyer, a slick, old-money type from a firm on Beacon Hill. "Just a formality, Artie," William had said, sliding the thick stack of papers across the desk. "Standard partnership boilerplate. Protects us both." I was 22 years old. I knew how to calculate the tensile strength of steel to 7 decimal places, but I couldn't decipher a single paragraph of the dense legalese. I trusted my friend. I signed where he told me to sign. Now, sitting at my kitchen table at 62, I read it again. And again. The language was deliberately obtuse, a labyrinth of clauses and subclauses designed to confuse and obscure. But after hours of painstaking reading, I found the viper hidden in the weeds. It was in Article 4, Section B, titled Succession and Partnership Interest. To any normal person, it looked like a standard succession plan. But I knew what I was looking for now. The clause stated that in the event of the death of a founding partner, their full equity and voting rights would transfer to their designated heir. My clause, however, was different. It stated that in the event of William Callahan Sr.'s death, my partnership interest would be automatically converted into a non-equity senior position, and my compensation would be redefined as a salary based on my continued service and performance. My shares, my ownership, my half of the company I had built from scratch, had vanished into thin air the moment William's heart stopped beating. The agreement I signed wasn't a partnership, it was a time-delayed corporate execution. William hadn't just built a company with me, he had built a trap for me, and for 12 years, I had been working in a cage without even knowing it had doors. The rage I felt was so pure, so absolute, it was almost silent. It wasn't the hot, explosive anger of a young man. It was the cold, dense anger of an old one, an anger that had been pressurized over decades of quiet slights and unwitting servitude. He had used my friendship, my trust, and my creative soul as raw materials for his dynasty. He had made his son an emperor and me a serf, and he'd done it with the stroke of a pen 50 years ago. I called a lawyer that morning. Not some big shot from a downtown firm, I knew the Callahans had them all on retainer. I found a young, hungry shark named Maria Flores, a solo practitioner working out of a small office in Jamaica Plain. She was sharp, aggressive, and unimpressed by old Boston money. I brought her the agreement. She read it in 20 minutes, her expression hardening with every page. "Mr. Stone," she said, looking up at me, her eyes glinting with a fighter's light. "This isn't a partnership agreement. This is a work of art. It's the most elegantly vicious piece of legal screwjob I've ever seen. He made you a glorified employee from day one, but gave you the title of partner to keep you happy and creating. The moment he died, you were legally neutered. You have no claim to the company. No claim to the profits. And most critically," she said, tapping a paragraph in the intellectual property section, "no claim to the patents and designs you created while under this agreement. They own your mind, Arthur. They own your work." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. They owned my mind. Liam Callahan had been right. History is written by the winners. And legally, they had already won. Maria looked at me, expecting to see a broken old man. She saw the pain in my eyes, I'm sure of it. But what she also saw was the faint, cold glimmer of an idea beginning to form. "So a lawsuit is pointless," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the earthquake happening inside me. "Pointless and expensive," she confirmed. "They'd bury us in motions. We'd be lucky to get a nuisance settlement." "Good," I said, a grim smile touching my lips for the first time in days. "I'm not interested in their money. Maria leaned forward, intrigued. Then what are you interested in, Mr. Stone? I looked out her office window, toward the distant glass and steel towers of downtown Boston, some of which I had designed. My buildings. My legacy. They've stolen my past, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I'm going to steal their future. You said they own the patents and designs. They own the blueprints. But they don't own the knowledge that created them. They have the sheet music, but they don't have the composer. I explained my plan. The core of Callahan and Stone's dominance, the Callahan method as Liam called it, was a series of integrated design principles and a proprietary software suite I had developed over 30 years. It was a system so complex, so nuanced, that only I truly understood its intricacies. The current architects at the firm knew how to operate the software, but they didn't understand the underlying architectural philosophy. They were pilots, not engineers. They could fly the plane, but they couldn't build a new one. More importantly, years ago, when I first coded the base of the software, I had built in a kill switch. A backdoor. A master key known only to me. It was a contingency I created in case of a hostile takeover, a way to protect my work. I never imagined the hostility would come from within. Liam is bidding on the new Museum of Contemporary History project, I told Maria. It's the most prestigious contract in the city in a generation. It's his coronation. He wants to put his own stamp on the city, to prove he's more than just his father's son. He's going to use my system to do it. Maria's eyes widened as she grasped the scale of what I was proposing. You're going to burn the kingdom down, she said, a slow, admiring smile spreading across her face. No, I replied, standing up and buttoning my coat. I'm going to expose the king as a naked fraud. And then I'm going to repossess his kingdom. My first act of war wasn't a letter from a lawyer. It was the quiet registration of a new business entity, Stone Structural Solutions, LLC. The world thought Arthur Stone was fading into retirement. The truth was, I was just getting started. The dynasty had been built on my foundation. And I knew, better than anyone, exactly where all the load-bearing walls were. And I knew just how to bring them down. The first phase of my plan was subtle, almost passive. It was a war of whispers. I spent the next few months in a state of meticulous, focused obsession. I converted the basement of my brownstone into a command center. The walls were covered in project timelines, financial reports I'd managed to download from the Callahan and Stone servers before my access was finally revoked, and detailed profiles of every key player in Boston's architectural and real estate scenes. I was no longer an architect, I was a strategist, and the city was my chessboard. Liam, in his arrogance, made it easy. He was a man who craved the spotlight, constantly giving interviews to publications like Boston Magazine and the Architectural Digest, bragging about the firm's seamless transition and its new era of innovation. Every word he spoke was a lie, and every lie was a weapon he was unknowingly handing me. My first target was the firm's reputation for infallibility. Callahan and Stone had built its name on perfection. My designs were not just beautiful, they were flawless, delivered on time and on budget. Liam, however, was cutting corners to maximize profits. He was using cheaper materials, pushing younger, less experienced architects to rush through complex structural analyses, and ignoring the meticulous quality control protocols I had established. He didn't understand that my system was a holistic one. Changing one variable without understanding its relationship to the others could have cascading consequences. I knew exactly which projects would show the first cracks, literally. There was a luxury condo development in the seaport, one of the last projects I had personally overseen the initial schematics for before my departure. I knew that the foundation required a specific, proprietary curing process for my carbon fiber concrete blend, a process that was time-consuming and expensive. I was certain Liam's project manager, a yes-man named Peterson, would have opted for a faster, cheaper method. Using a burner email and a pseudonym, Concerned Bostonian, I sent an anonymous tip to a sharp, investigative reporter at the Boston Globe named Jessica Russo. I had followed her work for years. She had a reputation for sinking her teeth into corporate malfeasance and not letting go. My email was short and simple. I suggested she have a structural engineer, a third-party engineer, take a look at the publicly filed stress test reports for the Seaport Project's foundation. I even told her what to look for, microfractures and discrepancies in the reported tensile strength. I attached no evidence, just a single question: why did Callahan and Stone switch concrete suppliers mid-project? 2 weeks later, a small article appeared on page B4 of the Globe, questions raised over Seaport Luxury Towers foundation. It was a minor tremor, not an earthquake, but I felt it across the city. The article quoted anonymous sources within the construction crew and mentioned that the city's Department of Public Works was launching a preliminary review. Liam's response was swift and dismissive. He issued a press release calling the story baseless speculation from disgruntled sources and a pathetic attempt to smear a 50-year legacy of excellence. He was projecting strength, but I knew the truth. I had just cost him millions in legal fees and inspection costs, and more importantly, I had planted the first seed of doubt in the public mind. The Callahan name was no longer untouchable. While Liam was busy playing PR whack-a-mole, I was launching the second phase of my attack. Through Stone Structural Solutions, I began bidding on smaller consulting jobs around the city. I wasn't trying to win huge contracts yet. I was gathering intelligence and building a new reputation. My name was still on the company, but I hired a young, bright architect named David Chin to be the public face of the business. I was the silent partner, the wizard behind the curtain. Our strategy was surgical. We would find projects where Callahan and Stone was a bidder and come in with a proposal that was not just cheaper, but smarter. I knew their bidding process inside and out. I knew their margins, their supplier costs, their man-hour estimates. I had written the algorithms they used to calculate those things. We won a contract to retrofit a historic building in the North End, a project Liam's firm had bid on arrogantly, assuming it was theirs. Our proposal was 15% cheaper and twice as efficient, using a new reinforcement technique I had conceptualized years ago but never implemented. The client was ecstatic. Liam was furious. He couldn't understand how a no-name startup could outmaneuver him. I pictured him in his sprawling corner office, looking down on the city I had helped build, his sense of entitlement curdling into paranoia. He would have his lawyers investigate my firm, of course. They would find nothing. Stone Structural Solutions was legally airtight, a fortress built by Maria Flores. All they would see was a small, agile company run by a promising young architect, with an old, retired consultant named Arthur Stone listed as a silent partner. I was hiding in plain sight. The true masterstroke of this phase, however, involved the Museum of Contemporary History. It was the prize jewel, the project that would define the next 50 years of Boston architecture. The city had issued a public request for proposals, and every major firm in the country was vying for it. The selection process would be long and arduous, culminating in a public presentation before the City Council and the museum's Board of Trustees. This was the battlefield I had chosen for my final confrontation. I began preparing for it with the meticulous patience of a grandmaster. I wasn't just designing a building, I was designing a weapon. A building so perfect, so innovative, and so deeply rooted in the principles Liam was trying to steal, that it would serve as the ultimate indictment of his fraud. While my firm worked on our official proposal, I worked on a parallel track. I used the backdoor I had built into Callahan and Stone's design software. It was a ghost key, untraceable, that gave me access to their active project servers. I became a phantom in their machine. I watched as their team, under Liam's clueless direction, began to assemble their own museum proposal. And what I saw was horrifying. They were using my foundational principles, but without understanding them, they were stretching them to their breaking point. They were designing a massive, cantilevered glass atrium that was visually stunning but structurally unsound. They were miscalculating the load distribution, using the wrong material composites, creating a design that was, under the right stress conditions like a heavy snowstorm or high winds, a potential catastrophe. Liam, in his hubris, was so focused on creating a spectacular Instagrammable moment that he was ignoring the fundamental laws of physics. He was building a glass house on a foundation of lies. And I was going to be the one to throw the first stone. I downloaded every file, every miscalculation, every internal memo questioning the design that was subsequently ignored by Liam's project lead. I was compiling a dossier that would not just cost him the contract, but would potentially ruin him forever. Maria was right. I wasn't just burning the kingdom down. I was salting the earth where it once stood. The paranoia I had hoped to instill in Liam began to manifest in ugly, predictable ways. He couldn't trace the source of the leak to the globe, nor could he legally prove how my new firm was consistently outbidding him. So, he did what weak, powerful men always do. He resorted to brute force intimidation. He couldn't fight me in the light, so he decided to come for me in the shadows. It started with a phone call. I was in my workshop, refining a scale model of our museum proposal, when my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. I answered. "Arthur," a voice oozed. It was Liam. He sounded casual, friendly even, but there was a serrated edge to his tone. "Liam Callahan. How's retirement treating you?" "I'm keeping busy," I said, my voice flat and calm. "I bet you are," he chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Listen, I was just calling to say, it's a small town, Boston. People talk. And I've been hearing your name attached to this little upstart firm that's been a nuisance. Just wanted to make sure some young kid isn't taking advantage of your good name in your old age." It was a threat wrapped in a veil of condescending concern. He was testing me, trying to see if I'd flinch. "I'm a silent partner, Liam," I said coolly. "Just a small investment to keep my mind active. David Chin is the talent." Right. David Chin," he said, drawing out the name as if tasting it for the first time. "Well, you tell Mr. Chin that Boston can be a very unforgiving place for newcomers who don't show the proper respect for the established players. Some bridges, you just don't want to burn." "Is that so?" I asked, my knuckles white as I gripped a small wood file. "It is," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Consider this a professional courtesy, Arthur. From one old family friend to another. Fade away gracefully. Enjoy your severance. Don't make things unpleasant." He hung up. The line went dead, but the message was clear. It wasn't a warning, it was a promise. A week later, the city's building inspectors showed up at one of our active construction sites, a small community center we were building in Roxbury. They came armed with a surprise audit, citing an anonymous safety complaint. They swarmed the site for 2 days, nitpicking every detail, trying to find a violation, anything to shut us down. They found nothing. Our work was impeccable. It was a classic power play, a move designed to bleed us dry with delays and legal headaches. I knew Liam had called in a favor at City Hall. I countered by calling Jessica Russo at the Globe. I didn't give her the story, just a question. I asked her to look into how many anonymous safety audits had been launched against smaller architectural firms in the last 6 months, and to cross-reference those firms with the bidding lists for projects that Callahan and Stone had also bid on. I was teaching her the shape of the monster, letting her connect the dots herself. But Liam's tactics escalated. One night, as I was walking home from my office, a car slowed beside me. The window rolled down, and a man I didn't recognize, built like a brick wall in a cheap suit, leaned over from the passenger seat. "Mr. Stone," he grunted. "Mr. Callahan asked me to remind you that old buildings sometimes have weak foundations. It'd be a shame if something were to happen to that pretty little brownstone of yours." The car sped off, leaving me standing on the sidewalk, the smell of exhaust fumes hanging in the cold night air. The threat was no longer veiled. He was threatening my home. The home I had shared with Eleanor. The sanctuary where every memory of her lived. That was his mistake. He had taken my work, he had taken my legacy, but when he threatened my memories of her, he severed the last thread of restraint I had. The war was no longer just about justice. It was personal. That night, I made a decision. I had been planning to expose him at the museum presentation, to humiliate him professionally. Now, that wasn't enough. I wasn't just going to take his company. I was going to take his liberty. I had spent weeks as a ghost in his company's servers, watching them design their flawed museum. But my access gave me more than just their blueprints. It gave me everything. I started a new line of inquiry, moving away from architectural files and into the dark corners of their accounting servers. I followed the digital money trail, looking for the slush funds and off-the-books payments that always accompany the kind of political string-pulling Liam was using against me. And I found it. It was a series of exorbitant payments made to a shell corporation, a consulting firm called Trident Advisory Group. The payments were listed as civic engagement consulting, a term so vague it was laughable. With a little more digging, I discovered that Trident Advisory was owned by one man, the brother-in-law of Boston City Councilman Michael Joyce, the head of the zoning committee and a key vote on the museum project. Liam wasn't just calling in favors, he was buying them. This was bribery. It was a felony. I now had two weapons. The first was the proof of Liam's professional fraud, the flawed museum design, the stolen legacy of my work. The second was proof of his criminal conspiracy, the illegal payments, the public corruption. I realized I could not deploy both at once. A public accusation of fraud at the museum presentation would be a media spectacle. A criminal complaint would be a quiet, legal detonation. If I did them together, one might overshadow the other. Liam's high-priced lawyers could muddy the waters, claiming it was all a smear campaign by a disgruntled former employee. No, the sequence had to be perfect. I had to let him walk into the trap himself. He needed to be at the absolute peak of his arrogance, standing on the biggest stage imaginable, before I brought the ceiling down on his head. I called Maria Flores. I laid out everything I had found, the faulty engineering, the server backdoor, and now, the bribery. She was silent for a long moment on the other end of the line. When she finally spoke, her voice was grave. "Arthur," she said, "this has gone far beyond a business dispute. You have evidence that can send powerful people to prison. We have to be extremely careful about our next move." "I know," I said. "And I know exactly what it is." I instructed her to package the evidence of the bribery, the invoices, the bank transfers, the shell company registration, into a secure file. "You will hold on to that," I told her. "Do not act on it." "Not yet." "What about the museum presentation?" she asked. "It's in 2 weeks." "The presentation goes ahead as planned," I said, a cold certainty settling over me. Liam is expecting me to fight him on his terms, with blueprints and building codes. He thinks it's a battle for a contract. I paused, looking at a framed photo of Eleanor on my desk. I remembered her words, "Your mind is your kingdom, Arthur." "He's wrong," I finished. "It's not a battle. It's an execution. And it's time to build the scaffold." The final 2 weeks leading up to the museum presentation were the calm before the storm. On the surface, I was the picture of a semi-retired consultant. I took walks along the Charles River, had coffee at the Thinking Cup on Newberry Street, and spent afternoons at the Museum of Fine Arts, quietly studying the masters. To the outside world, Arthur Stone was winding down. But in reality, every waking moment was a final rehearsal for the demolition I was about to perform. I went over my presentation 100 times, refining every word, timing every pause. It was the most important design of my life, not of a building, but of a man's downfall. Liam, meanwhile, was basking in the glow of his presumed victory. Callahan Stone was the odds-on favorite to win the museum contract. He gave an exclusive interview to the Wall Street Journal in which he unveiled renderings of his vision. The article was a masterpiece of propaganda, praising the bold, gravity-defying design and heralding Liam as a worthy heir to the Callahan architectural dynasty. He was on top of the world, a king surveying his domain from a castle I had built, completely unaware that I was in the dungeons below, patiently filing through the chains. The day of the presentation arrived. It was held in the City Council chambers at Boston City Hall, a grand, imposing room with dark wood paneling and soaring ceilings. The space was packed. The mayor was there, along with the entire city council, the museum's board of trustees, dozens of journalists, and the heads of every major development firm in the city. It was the most powerful audience one could assemble in Boston. I sat in the back row with my associate, David Chen. I was just an old man in a simple gray suit, invisible. All eyes were on Liam Callahan, who sat at the front, flanked by a team of lawyers and architects, looking regal and supremely confident. Councilman Michael Joyce, the man whose brother-in-law owned the Shell Corporation, gave Liam a subtle, reassuring nod from his seat on the dais. The pieces were all in place. The presentations began. 2 other firms went first, showcasing impressive but conventional designs. Then, it was Liam's turn. He strode to the podium with the swagger of a man who already knew he had won. He launched into a slick, charismatic speech about legacy, vision, and the future of Boston. Then, he unveiled the centerpiece of his proposal, a massive, interactive 3D model of his museum design, projected onto a huge screen behind him. The room gasped. It was, I had to admit, visually breathtaking. A shimmering jewel box of glass and steel that seemed to float above the ground. He walked the audience through the design, hitting all the right buzzwords: sustainability, community engagement, iconic silhouette. It was a triumph of salesmanship over substance. He was selling them a beautiful dream. I was about to give them a brutal awakening. Finally, it was our turn. The council president announced, and now, a presentation from a new firm, Stone Structural Solutions. David Chen walked to the podium. He was nervous, but he was ready. He began our presentation, and a quiet murmur went through the room as our design appeared on the screen. It was different from Liam's. It was elegant, powerful, and understated. It was a building that respected the laws of physics, a design that was both beautiful and honest. David spoke for 10 minutes, outlining our approach, our materials, our vision for a museum that would serve the community for centuries. Then, he came to the final slide. And now, David said, his voice gaining strength, for the technical portion of our presentation, I'd like to introduce the lead designer on this project, the founder of our firm and the man whose half-century of experience has made this vision possible. Mr. Arthur Stone. I stood up from the back row and began the long walk to the podium. A confused ripple went through the chamber. People were whispering, pointing. I saw Liam's face. His confident smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of stunned disbelief, which quickly hardened into a mask of pure rage. He had thought I was a ghost. But I was very, very real. I reached the podium, adjusted the microphone, and looked out at the assembled power of the city. I didn't look at my notes. I didn't need them. Good morning, I said, my voice calm and clear, amplified by the speakers. My name is Arthur Stone. For 50 years, I was the founding partner and chief architect of Callahan Stone. The whispers grew louder. I saw Liam lean over and hiss something to his lawyer. I ignored him and turned my gaze to the screen displaying his glittering design. The proposal you have just seen from Mr. Callahan is indeed breathtaking, I continued. It is a testament to the power of imagination. However, it is also a testament to the dangers of ambition when it is untethered from the constraints of reality and expertise. And then, I began the dissection. For the next 15 minutes, I turned the city council chamber into a lecture hall, and Liam Callahan was my sole, unwilling student. I started by using the remote in my hand to call up his own structural schematics, which I had legally obtained through public record requests. Let's begin with the atrium, I said, using a laser pointer to highlight a key support junction in the massive glass ceiling. This cantilever design is based on a principle I first developed in 1998 for the Triton Tower. It is a system I know intimately. Then, with a click of the remote, I overlaid a series of complex physics equations and stress simulation models onto his design. As you can see from this harmonic resonance analysis, the Callahan team has used a steel alloy composite that is fundamentally inappropriate for this span. Under a sustained wind load of just 60 miles per hour, or a heavy, wet snow load of 2 feet, the vibration frequency would reach a critical failure point. In short, ladies and gentlemen, this beautiful glass ceiling would collapse. A collective gasp went through the room. The journalists were scribbling furiously. I saw the mayor lean forward in his seat, his expression grim. Liam had gone pale. I moved on, systematically, ruthlessly. I exposed the flaws in his foundation, the miscalculations in his load-bearing walls, the inadequate wind shear resistance. I wasn't just criticizing his design, I was revealing that he and his team didn't understand the very architectural principles they were claiming to champion, the principles that I had created. Then came the final blow. But how could a firm with a 50-year reputation for excellence make such fundamental errors? I asked the silent room. The answer is simple. The Callahan method, as Mr. Callahan likes to call it, is not a method. It was a man. It was me. I clicked the remote one last time. And on the giant screen, for all of Boston to see, I activated the backdoor in the Callahan Stone software. A command window flashed open, and I initiated a search protocol I had designed decades ago. I searched for a hidden digital watermark, a unique string of code based on Eleanor's birthday that I had secretly embedded into the metadata of every single original blueprint I had ever created. One by one, the firm's most famous designs flashed onto the screen: the Triton Tower, the Athenaeum Theater, the Westwood Bridge. And on each one, a highlighted string of code appeared, proving my authorship beyond any shadow of a doubt. I had just signed my name to my life's work in front of the entire world. The Callahan Dynasty, I said, my voice ringing with the cold finality of a judge's gavel, was built on a lie. And today, that lie has come to an end. The chamber erupted into chaos. Cameras flashed. City council members were shouting. I saw Liam, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred, being restrained by his lawyers as he tried to lunge towards the podium. He was finished. His reputation was incinerated. But I wasn't done yet. I looked directly at Jessica Russo from the Globe, who was sitting in the front row, her eyes wide. I gave her a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was the signal. It was time for the second weapon. She knew what to do. The professional humiliation was public. The criminal indictment would be next. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. As the city council chamber descended into a pandemonium of shouting reporters and bewildered officials, I saw Jessica Russo slip out, her phone already pressed to her ear. My public testimony had been the cannon shot that breached the castle walls. The story she was about to publish would be the army that stormed inside and took no prisoners. I stepped away from the podium, my work there done, and let David Chin guide me through the stunned crowd. The looks I received were a mixture of awe, pity, and fear. I had become, in the space of 15 minutes, a legend, the quiet old man who had toppled a giant. By the time I reached my car, the first alerts were already hitting people's phones. The Boston Globe website had a new banner headline: Architectural Fraud and Corruption Scandal Rocks City Hall. Callahan Stone CEO Liam Callahan accused of bribery, endangering public in museum bid. Jessica's article was a bombshell. It led with my explosive testimony at the hearing, detailing the fraudulent claims and dangerous design flaws. But then it pivoted, using my public revelations as the hook for an even bigger story. It laid out, in meticulous detail, the web of shell corporations and illicit payments connecting Liam Callahan to Councilman Joyce. She had the bank records I'd given Maria, the invoices, the proof of the conspiracy. My testimony gave her story the unimpeachable credibility it needed. I hadn't just accused Liam of being a fraud, I had established the motive for his bribery. He had to buy the contract because he was no longer capable of winning it on merit. The city government went into immediate crisis mode. The mayor called an emergency press conference, announcing that the museum project was suspended indefinitely pending a full investigation. The district attorney's office, preempting any accusations of a cover-up, announced they were launching a criminal probe into both Callahan Stone and the office of Councilman Joyce. Liam was trapped. There was no escape. His lawyers couldn't spin this. His money couldn't make it go away. I had used his own arrogance as the bait, and the trap had snapped shut with perfect, brutal precision. Over the next few weeks, the Callahan dynasty crumbled to dust. Liam was forced to step down as CEO. The firm's board of directors, facing a tidal wave of lawsuits from clients and investors, ousted him in a desperate attempt to save the company. But it was too late. Clients began pulling their contracts. Major projects were put on hold. The firm's top architects, realizing they were on a sinking ship run by a fraud, began to flee. The Callahan Stone name, once a symbol of prestige and excellence, was now synonymous with corruption and incompetence. Their stock value plummeted to zero. They were ruined. Within 6 months, the firm that had taken 50 years to build was forced to declare bankruptcy, its assets liquidated to pay off its creditors. Liam and Councilman Joyce were indicted by a grand jury. The trial was a media circus. I was called as the star witness for the prosecution. I sat in the witness box at the Suffolk County Courthouse, not 20 feet from Liam, and calmly, methodically, told the jury the entire story. The 50-year lie. The stolen credit. The intimidation. The fraud. I watched Liam's face as I testified. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a hollow, defeated emptiness. He knew he was beaten. He looked like a man who had his own soul repossessed. He was found guilty on 3 counts of bribery and wire fraud and was sentenced to 5 to 7 years in federal prison. I won, of course. Stone Structural Solutions was awarded the contract to redesign and build the new Museum of Contemporary History. We started from scratch, with an honest design, built on a foundation of truth. My new firm became the most sought after in the city, built not on a famous name, but on a reputation for integrity and brilliance. I had taken back my legacy. I had cleared my name. I had achieved everything I set out to do. The victory was total. But revenge is a strange and hollow conquest. After the trials were over and the noise had faded, I found myself sitting alone in my vast new office on the top floor of the John Hancock Tower, looking out over the city. I was surrounded by success. I had more money than I could ever spend, a thriving company, and the respect of my peers. I had destroyed my enemies and reclaimed my life's work. Yet, an undeniable silence had settled into my life. The fire that had fueled me for that year, the cold, burning rage, was gone. And in its place was a quiet, profound exhaustion. The fight had given me purpose, but the victory had taken it away. I had spent so long focused on tearing something down that I had almost forgotten how to build. I now split my time. I advise David and the talented young architects at my firm, but I no longer take the lead on the big projects. My passion has shifted. I spend most of my days working on smaller, pro bono projects, designing a new wing for a children's hospital, a shelter for the homeless, a small, beautiful public park in a forgotten neighborhood. I find more satisfaction in designing a single, perfectly crafted park bench than I ever did in designing a skyscraper. I am building again, but I am building things that serve, not things that soar. They had taken 50 years of my life, so I took the only thing that mattered to them in return, the future of their name. The end.